everybody, and welcome back. It's really good to see everyone again. It's been 2 weeks, hasn't it, since seeing as we had our reading week in between this, and really excited to have Daniel Schmachtenberger with us today. And we're going to start pretty soon. And the format of today is going to be similar to some of the previous sessions. So I'm going to ask Daniel a few questions and kind of specific questions, something we haven't done on the course before, because Daniel's been working on a new project, the Consilience project, which is, I suppose, what he's going to tell us about, but I suppose you could talk about it as a very ambitious sense-making project. So it's really live on the ground, tackling a lot of the issues that we're discussing and training ourselves, hopefully, to be able to get better at navigating on the course. So I think it's a really nice opportunity. So, and we may have a breakout depending on how we're flowing. If we're really in a flow, then we might not. We might also have a breakout and an inquiry. And before we do that, just because we haven't been together for a couple of weeks now, I wanted to just invite us to maybe just really arrive in this shared space that we're in. Maybe even taking a nice deep breath, just moving from the doing mode that we might have been in all day to just really arriving here and seeing if we can drop in and become present with one another. So yeah, maybe taking another deep breath, maybe even going into gallery view and just checking in with who else is here. And I invite you to become aware, maybe feel in your body somewhere the intention, maybe the longing, the curiosity that inspired you to sign up for this course, whenever it was, maybe a couple months ago. Just seeing if you can really make it real for you in this moment, really alive. Some curiosity that inspired you to really commit and dive into a course called Sensemaking 101, where we are really earnestly trying to make sense of what on earth is going on right now. And just to remind us of the process we've been on. So we started the course really coming to our senses and really starting at the basics of, if we want to make sense, we have to wake up in some way to our senses. And we used the metaphor of being lost in the woods at night. And so we explore the sovereignty meditation and really looked at what presence is, what it means to develop a situational awareness, so we know where we are first, and even that we are. And then we started looking around the forest a little bit and noticing all the shadows, all the uncertainties we see around us, all of the skewed perception. We had Doshin Roshi helping us understand attachment theory, understanding the shadow above all, understanding how our perception can be warped when there are aspects of ourselves that we cut off and push into the basement, and what it looks like to integrate those to have just a bit more of a clear perception. And then John Vervaeke took us even deeper into the cognitive science of the many ways we can deceive ourselves as human beings, the many ways we can fall into cognitive traps, and the ways that we can expand outwards, zoom in and zoom out of our own experience to start repairing those cognitive missteps, partial truths, jumping to conclusions. And we looked at how the practices, what he calls the psychotechnologies, like meditation and concentration, inquiry, can help us to do that. And then just before the reading week, Diane Mitchell Hamilton talked about how we relate to one another, because we're not just making sense alone, we are finding some way to do that together, which can be really tricky. We looked at sameness and difference and how that shows up all the time in groups and how we can start to navigate that. And then we had a break, a reading week to digest and reflect. And now we're here, and we're, from this moment on, really starting the part of the course where we're taking all of those internal capacities and applying them to the world we see around us and how we make sense collectively. So this is kind of, everything has been, in a sense, a preparation for now, and also important in and of itself. And of course, everything we do here will be a preparation for the next session to some degree too. So wanted to welcome you, Daniel, and say thanks for being here. Okay.
Howdy.
Good to see you. So, Daniel, is just before we start talking maybe about what you've been doing recently, is there anything you wanted to say before then? Anything you wanted to ask or express?
I was going to ask what you guys have done so far, but you just gave me a good short little overview of that. And I actually wasn't thinking we were going to talk about the Consilience project. Said there were some questions from the audience. I'm happy to say a little bit, but the project goes live next month, and it'll explain itself fairly well. So I'm happy to answer any questions that might be useful.
Right. Yeah, we don't have to talk about it exclusively. I thought what just might be interesting is maybe actually first see a show of hands of who's seen the films we've put out with Daniel on the channel. Just a physical show of hands. Yes. As I suspected, it's probably 85% of everyone. So, so what I thought would be interesting is Daniel, you have a gift for exploring the information landscape and what is going on in our attempt to make sense right now. And you've more recently, I think, been looking at kind of finding, in some sense, I suppose, some solutions to that problem rather than just diagnosing it. Would you say that's kind of fairly accurate way to say it? Yeah. So what I thought might be a nice place to start would be, has anything surprised you in that process? Have you, or is anything kind of, just what you might have be learning in the process of doing that, in the process of moving from maybe the analysis to the implementation?
The process that we're doing right now involves machine tools to be able to do big data analysis, but is very much a human hands-on process of people that have a good depth of background in different epistemic methods working together. And it's super slow and not very scalable. And as I'm thinking about how to make it more scalable, there are some answers that involve changes in technology, obviously, and there have to be. But the answers that we're largely focused on are training a lot more people to have better epistemics. And if you think about it like, all right, there's lots of problems in the world that we want to solve. Well, what's going to solve it? What's going to address all the planetary boundaries, extinction risk, resource depletion type issues, or how we apply new exponential texts before there's regulation that could apply to them, where the externalities of them are way faster and more critical than previous issues ever were, or, you know, when we can't coordinate as a country or across countries for global issues, we obviously have to have decision-making processes that have much better capacity to coordinate than we currently have, which means healthier institutions, and not just institutional, but interinstitutional processes. Insofar as we're talking about open societies and, you know, democratic type institutions, if they are to have their power come from the consent of the governed, it's truly of, for, and by the people in some way, the people have to be able to actually consent in and contribute to that thing and have collective intelligence contribute to it, which means there's a quality of both educatedness and informedness that has to be commensurate to the problem space. And so if you see education and fourth estate as antecedents to any kind of democratic effectiveness, and you understand the scope and speed of the issues that we need to be implementing right now, and you see that there's been both institutional decay in education and the fourth estate while having exponential complexification of the problem space, those two don't work together. So you've got to get so basically what I'm saying is all the problems require methods of coordination, which either looks like centralized or decentralized institutions or some of both. Those are going to be as good as the capacities of the people, which is a culture thing. And so if you want to change a perverse incentive of the market, what is it that's going to do that? Not market incentive. It's going to be something other than market incentive that has you figure out how to encode something into law, to use rule of law to change it or whatever. Well, where does that value come from? It comes from culture. So the ability to make sense of what's going on and to make sense of what is worth valuing and to coordinate towards that has to arise at the culture level and then can get implemented through institutional levels. So how do we have a culture where people value making much better sense of the world and being in much better dialogue with each other, because everyone has different aspects of sense making and we have to coordinate together, because disagreeing with them doesn't make them stop being actors in the world that are economic and political actors. How do we develop those values more, and then develop the trainings and capacities and then technologies to be able to facilitate those? Those are things that we've been thinking about a lot.
So with that in mind, you know, there's a phrase that John Vervaeke said on the Stoa, and it's become kind of something they say on the Stoa a lot, which is steal the culture. So this idea of cultural transformation. Do you have any thoughts around how that's best done? How do you change the culture?
Yeah. There's some things we can learn from historical examples of where historical enlightenments or golden ages or things happened where there was some kind of meaningful type of distributed progress. Some of the case studies are actually really interesting when you look at the European Enlightenment, and obviously it should be critiqued for all the reasons that it should be critiqued. But the advancement of the philosophy of science and social dialectic and the idea of the dignity of the individual, so coming out of the oppression of feudalism, like there were some really important things there. And to ask how that came out of the Dark Ages, obviously the Renaissance was a start, which was something less threatening that started to look at knowledge that had been lost in antiquity. But there were some fairly small mystery schools. They were mystery at the time because they were studying things that were forbidden. So the Invisible College is one that Zach Stein likes to talk about a lot. It's an interesting historical example where Francis Bacon and friends got together and like, let's just figure out this Enlightenment kind of thinking well, and then let's make school curriculums based on it, and let's make some papers based on it. And then you started to get a decentralized cultural movement from something that started relatively small. So one answer is there are already people that are thinking about things that are, if you if you take any model of development, the development of how inclusive ethics are or how complex someone's epistemology is, you're going to have a Gaussian distribution of that development across the culture. There's already going to be some people who have, for whatever reason, worked harder, cared more, had better opportunity to get to more development. Those people coming together and saying, how do we have more coherence together to build things that become a strange attractor, where what's 2 standard deviations to the right becomes the new median. And I think that's probably part of the goal of what's happening here. I think another, so that's part of it, is you just start to build better culture with those who are ready to build it. And then if it is actually a better culture, it should have empirical success that's associated that makes it compelling to more people. Meaning this group of people are actually making sense of things better, that should reduce to the ability to do better problem solving and better interpersonal relationships and things like that. I think you also need to translate it to all the different subcultures in ways that they can relate to and make movements to adjacent possibles. So we had somebody reach out to us who's building a rap battle platform. So as to take people who have, who are really pissed off against the system and having kind of impulse to violence, and be able to sublimate that violence through a rap battle the way that can happen. That also requires them getting better at language and better at kind of improv thinking and, whatever. And we started talking, they're like, well, we can get the best rap battlers in the world, have them study issues of police violence and race and whatever that you guys are putting out that are more nuanced than the 2 polarized versions that are both partially true and partially wrong. Win the rap battles and have that be an inspiration for everyone else. Say, how did you learn that stuff? And that's just like a really fun example of how do you start to bring something to a culture that meets both the cultural aesthetics as well as the emotionality, that there's anger and power type dynamics, in a way that also offers a vector of development. And you can think about lots of different subcultures and possibilities like that.
Nice. Thank you, Daniel. There's actually some really nice questions coming in right now that I think are a natural segue from what we were talking about. So I wanted to invite Emer to maybe start us off with the questions. Emer, if you want to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Hi, Daniel. Thank you a lot for your work, first of all. I was just wondering, knowing everything that you know, are there any trends that you're particularly optimistic about?
In anything?
I guess generally speaking, what I'm asking is, like, there's so much stimulus about like kind of negativity, and we all kind of know the risks. I'm sure you know more so than anyone. But yeah, like what would be the best thing for us to kind of focus our energy on? Like what?
Those are 2 different questions. Best thing to focus your energy on and existing trends are different questions, because there are some things worth focusing your energy on that are not yet trending. There are some things that are trending that could go in good or less good directions, depending upon some choices that are made. And so I wouldn't unequivocally say this is a good trend. I would say it is a trend that has promise. And then I also don't think that there's much I could say that everyone on this call should focus their energy on, because you have different skills and different things you're attracted to. And so I can't imagine answering this question well, but I can say a couple things that are like a couple trends that are interesting. Our friend Tristan Harris, who put The Social Dilemma out, and the success of that show, where it got 130 million views in the first couple months and then started getting paid attention to and picked up by government around the world. That's meaning how many people are paying attention to the fact that the first real catastrophic AI risk doesn't look like the Terminator or even drone weapons. It looks like Facebook feeds and Google and YouTube feeds. that's starting to become widely known enough and widely cared about enough that people can start thinking about solutions. It doesn't mean there's a lot of awesome solutions, but there are starting to be work done on everything from how do we make decentralized platforms or decentralized protocols to replace centralized platforms, to how would we change the business model of it, to what is humane tech at all, to how do we do antitrust in the network age, and a lot of things like that. That's actually really good. That's deep and important and fast moving problems that weren't being paid attention to that are being paid attention to more. I'm pretty inspired by what could happen in crypto. I'm also quite concerned by what could happen in crypto. That's one of those ones where there are a lot of places that it could go that are not great. But the idea of, there's a couple things. It is the biggest new wealth creation that's ever happened, which means it portends a radical transfer of power in terms of who has the economic power. That can just transfer to people where it's basically the same predispositions, but it could also transfer otherwise. And you could bundle an investment portfolio that involved some crypto that's going to do very well with a closed loop materials economy effort, so that you didn't have to be maximally extractive in the physical world. You could actually be maximally non-extractive and still have something highly profitable because of something digital that's very interesting that hadn't been possible before. And then also people recognizing, hey, as soon as there's this much capital, there are governance issues. So how do we do decentralized governance? Because we're not trying to create a centralized state or police force. These are super promising trends. And there is promise in them. And you can put those two I just mentioned together. So I'll give a few other examples. Could we use crypto to run the accounting of the governments of the world, where there was transparent visibility into government spending? Yep. And now you can't delete the emails or burn the records, right? Because you have an uncorruptible ledger. So where the money goes is uncorruptibly tracked. And you say, yeah, but what about black budgets? Well, it can be in the black budget and subpoenable, right? You can make it to where there's a subpoena process where it goes into gray oversight or then into the white oversight based on protocols, but which would mean from military to Congress and from Congress to general public or something like that. But the ability to not corrupt it means you can investigate into the efficiency of government spending. And when Elon started making rockets at something like 1,000 to 1 the price effectiveness that Boeing and Lockheed had been, and yet they had formal government monopolies on the production of military manufacturing of things like rockets, we got to see how stupidly bloated private contracting had made government spending. So then we get false theory of trade-offs that say we either cut government spending on military to have less taxes and have less national security, or have to keep taxing everyone to have national security. No, make 100 to 1 more efficiency, and you can have less taxes and more national security at the same time. You just need to stop all the corruption and theft that's happening. You can't do that without a kind of forced transparency. So that's pretty cool. Or let's imagine that you also use the crypto to encode what was happening in the historical events of the time, so people couldn't rewrite history later. That's actually fucking huge, because so much of justice and so much of how to solve problems and whatever comes down to needing to understand elements of history, and we always just fucking rewrite the history. And so that would be really profound. Or let's say we figured out how to do, like, there's work happening in open data and open science. So let's say that we could take all of science and encode it in something like a blockchain, where you have the data measurements are encoded, and you have to solve the Oracle problem in different ways, meaning to verify that the information being encoded is accurate. That's one of the tricky things, but that's making progress. Because you can ensure that it stays uncorrupted through the transforms within the system, but you have to make sure someone's not putting bullshit information in or withholding some of it, at first. There are ways of doing that. So imagine that we could put all the axioms of science, and we could put all of the data, and then we could put the logical transforms we made in a uncorruptible sequence, right? The logical sequence of it that you'd write up in a paper can now be step by step in something like a blockchain sequence. Then at some point in the future, we say this measurement was wrong, or this axiom was wrong. We can go to exactly that point and look at everything downstream from that used it or any of the daughters of it as an input, and we can flag all of those now for reassessment without having to reassess everything that didn't involve that. It just fucking transforms science, right? That's very cool. It also transforms corruption in science, as well as mistakes. So I think those are very interesting. One of the issues when we use Facebook or YouTube or any social platform, TikTok, is that we think that we're using a tool like we're used to using any of our other tools. It's some technology that was built, except it's not a technology, it's a company that is an agent operating to maximize profit. And it maximizes profit by maximizing extracting our attention because of an ad model. So we are actually the resource that it is doing extraction from, right? Mining does it from nature, whatever, it's doing extraction from the attention space. And so we're interacting with something we think is a tool that's actually an agent in a rivalrous war with us, but it's using top of the line AI and we're not, to be able to beat us at the control of our attention. Well, what if it wasn't an agent? What if there was no company that was profiting? It was truly a resource of the commons, so that I didn't have the newsfeed algorithm optimize time on site. I had it optimized for metrics that were much more aligned with human development and learning. Well, can we make a social technology that is a decentralized protocol rather than a centralized platform, where any wealth generated on it goes back to the partial ownership of everyone who is a token holder in that thing, and it doesn't have the same optimization goals? Yeah, could totally do that now. Does that start to portend a very different internet and a very different humanity that's being conditioned by it? Sure. So those are some examples of technologies. Now, I could mention a lot of ways that those technologies could go really bad. I won't, though, because we're talking about solutions. But is more just tokenization for kind of money and speculation interesting? No. Is creating a situation where, because no one trusts each other, we make it where you trust the algorithm. Does that have possible bad sides of doubling down on no one trusts each other? Sure. Can you make bad actions more encrypted? Sure. So you have to be careful in terms of thinking about what is this technology in service to, but it's a powerful technology that could be in service to very good things. I think I'm also inspired by things like this, right? Things like there's a lot of people coming together live to study, right? This is interesting because this is not like a normal personal development class where you're just doing Tony Robbins or meditation or something. You're trying to actually develop capacities that would make you a better citizen, capable of some kind of meaningful contribution, not just personal well-being. It recognizes that personal psychology is a part of it, but skill development is also a part of it, and theory is a part of it. And you don't get any accreditation for it. And so the fact that there's a lot of people doing things like this starting to occur and wanting to explore heterodox thought, but also just thought at all, I think is very good trend. So those are a few. Permaculture is a great movement, right? The application of already existing exponential tech to world problems like applying IoT sensors to be able to, IoT means Internet of Things, sensors to be able to detect nitrogen effluent running off from agriculture so as to be able to trace who the polluters are and create accountability there. And then also to put filters and sequestration technologies in, like there's a lot of things that could be quite good.
Awesome. Thanks, Emer. And Zach McKinney.
Hi there, Daniel. I am wrestling with a paradox, which is that the conditions that seem to fuel and exacerbate our current collective failures in sense-making, namely the deluge of information that we all encounter at every moment from every quarter, at the same time demands better sense-making. And so I'm wondering how to balance this. I mean, we want to empower and encourage people to be better, more vigilant sense makers on their own, but we also want to build an epistemic commons that enables a less cognitively demanding sense making. So I am wondering sort of what's your view of how to balance those two practices?
Who's going to build the better epistemic commons?
Is that a rhetorical? That's all of us. I mean, it needs to be as many of us as possible.
It's not going to be all of us.
It needs to certainly have nodes, I would say, of expertise, and those who orient towards them and then coordinate between them and perhaps try to connect and integrate as best as possible.
Yeah, the 30% of the US's population that thinks Africa is a country is not going to build the new epistemic commons. So it's important to understand that even understanding what an epistemic commons is, we're now talking about a fraction of a percent of the population. And we haven't even talked about, that's just understanding that it's a thing that should be, let alone what is good epistemology, how do commons management works, and how do you build shit. So it's going to be some people who are working on figuring this out for themselves, figuring out how do we make methods that make this easier for more people, that make more people figuring it out. And so you get a autopoietic process or a virtuous cycle between individual figuring stuff out and those individuals offering things that make it easier for an on-ramp for other people to do it, where then they're figuring stuff out is also harvestable by the thing that is put there. And I would say this is a general way to speak to the relationship between individualism and collectivism. And this shows up in the epistemic commons, but it shows up in every commons topic. And really, like every topic of ethics and law and social design is the individualist side says, yes, but some people do better even in shitty environments, and some people do poorly even in good environments because of their own agency and will. That's the thing that we want to empower, to the degree that you compensate for where people aren't doing well by taxing the people that are. You actually put exactly the wrong incentives in place, blah, blah, blah. You know that story, right? And there's a partial truth to it. There's a partial wrongness to it. And the other side says, yes, but statistically, even though you can find those outliers, statistically, the people that grow up wealthy and go to Exeter and then go to Harvard get better educations than the people who grow up undernourished and getting beat at home too much to be able to do homework and with shitty teachers and everything else. And so, and we can see this by comparing Finland to Darfur and saying, so how do we create a social context that raises all of the individuals? And of course the answer, and then the bullshit argument comes back, yeah, but welfare doesn't work, right? When you try to create social systems, welfare doesn't work and communism doesn't work. So when you try to create social systems that support the individuals, it makes dependent people forever. And we want to develop people that have more agency. only stupid social systems make people more dependent forever. A good social system is helping to develop the agentic capacity of the individual, but then also binding the agentic capacity of the individual to giving back to the commons in ways that make that process able to continue. And so then the enactment, so of course what we're trying to do is have some people develop themselves not just for themselves, right? But develop themselves in a way where they can build shit that makes it easier for other people to develop themselves. And then we're trying to make it easier for other people to develop themselves in ways that also gives them both the capacity and motive and incentive to do that in a way that also has collective benefit, right? And so we create a recursion. So then the question is, how do you boot that process in an area where it's not already happening well? You're going to boot it by finding individuals that are already endeavoring in that particular way, and then saying, how do we coordinate to be able to build systems that would help us, but that also provide on-ramps to help other people, thinking about the recursion of the design. Does that make sense? Resonate? Is that...
Yeah, absolutely. I think the concept of recursion and also a growing, radiating cultural value system that values sense making seem to be critical elements.
Yeah, I mean, on the cultural value system, there's a lot of ways to approach it. And valuing sense making is necessary, but it's not sufficient. Because I can be a great sociopath making very good sense of the world and using it for differential advantage. This is why when you read all the, modern democracy founding texts, and the founding of the US had a lot of this, they talked about the necessity of a moral as well as a cognitive education, and without which democracy has no chance of working. Because ultimately what we're trying to do is get coordination of choices, right? The choices people make. The choices are informed by what they value and their sense making, right? So their meaning making and their sense making. Their sense making is what do they think is happening and what do they think the effect of a particular action will be. Their values generation or their meaning making is what are they making choices in service to. So oftentimes we make a poor choice because we're misassessing what's happening or we're misassessing what the effects of an action will be. But oftentimes the wars occur because of a difference in values emphasis, where I'm focused on wanting my kids to have better economic prosperity. So I'm focused on the thing that seems to benefit the economy, and I'm not focused on the environment because it's a pain point I'm not as connected to. And the other people are focused on the environment in a way that creates the trade-offs with the economy. So the answer with values is you need to identify the value that is seeking to be served by a strategy, separate it from the strategy and say that there's never just one strategy that can serve the value. There's multiple different strategic ways of serving that value. Then you need to synthesize, or not here synthesize, even just accumulate the values across the whole system. The value, so let's just say in a simplified dialectic for a moment, the values that are trying to be served on each side separated from the strategy. And then say, what strategy would be the best synergistic satisfier for all these values, as opposed to have unnecessarily large theory of trade-offs between them. If you don't do that, then you're of course going to polarize the population and benefit some things while harming other things. So sense making, meaning making, choice making, and a loop on those. And now how do you get people to value that more? Well, you find people that already do, bring them into contexts with each other where, like, let's say that I'm in an institutional environment that is based on power dynamics that no one's allowed to speak to, so everyone's lying all the time, right? Like most institutions. Well, I'm not incented to share good sense making, because if I say, hey guys, everybody knows that nobody respects the CEO and they're all lying about it all the time, and I say that in the boardroom, I get fired, right? Or if I say string theory doesn't seem like it's made any success in 50 years and we should try a different approach in theoretical physics or whatever, I'm not going to get research funding or get tenure. Or so if we take the people out of an environment that incentivizes ladder climbing and bullshitting, but who are already oriented to better sense making and more authentic values, authentic and wider, meaning not just benefiting self and immediate close kin. And we put them in a context where they're actually allowed and encouraged to do that and try to come up with solutions that work. The solutions will actually be better solutions, because when your map matches the territory better, you'll actually navigate better. And when you factor more complexity, the solutions won't drive externalities. And so a part of it is just bringing people together in a different context that can make an alternate thing that is more effective, like just straightforwardly more effective. So it becomes a strange attractor where the results of its effectiveness draw more people to want to enter into it. Now, more effective can mean makes better technology. More effective can mean makes better relational space so that people want to be in it. And, you know, Brett Weinstein always says, if you could change what women were signaling they wanted to mate with, you would change the culture almost overnight. And of course, you could just as easily turn this back to say, well, the women were trained by a certain environment, so don't put the responsibility on them. That's of course true, but just to look at this, I think it was actually his brother Eric who said he wanted to start the hashtag #IFuckHeroes or something like that, of the how do we get, but it would be more like mensches than heroes. But you can even see that the mensch idea was it was a society. And it was important there, no sex till marriage, because then, and the no sex till marriage thing, and I'm not saying we should do that, but I'm saying there was an important reason for that got messed up. No sex till marriage was, if a woman doesn't think I'll be a good father forever, I will never get laid. And if her parents don't think I'll be a good father forever, I'll never get laid. And that meant, in order to be a good father, I had to be honest and integrous and have good relationships with the neighborhood and be able to follow through with things and be able to be a good teacher and all like that. So my need to get laid makes me have to become a good citizen. That was actually awesome. And we lost that badly with the sexual liberation movement, where now separating procreation and sex, I could be an asshole and still get laid. And so then the pickup movement followed that, pickup artist movement. So you can see that, like, there's market type incentives, there's status type incentives, there's reproductive type incentives. Can we start making this healthier environment in a way that thinks about all of those, where the actual healthier actions also have a better fulfillment on the right types of incentives that starts to become the draw for other people into the system?
Excellent. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Zach. Thanks, Daniel. Next up, we have Lorna.
Hi. I've put forward 2 questions. Hi, Daniel. Nice to see you. So can I ask my 2 questions or not, Alex?
Yes, I think I saw one question.
Which one?
I saw one question which was around
the petrolemma? No.
No, it was the second one, that because I don't know what that word means.
Okay.
but it's up to you. You ask your question, Lorna. Ask whichever question you want.
I'm going to be cheeky and put both to you, Daniel, if you don't mind. So I was watching the video that accompanies the workbook and in preparation for today's session, and 2 things came out from it for me. One was, in the video you said one of the first things we should do when we're sense making is to ask, why is anyone sharing what they're sharing? And I wanted to put that question to you to hear what your answer to that question would be. That's one. And my second question is, I often use tetralemma, don't know if you've come across that, as a tool to, when I'm working with clients who are stuck, who may be experiencing different challenges around taking different perspectives. So for those who don't know what a tetralemma is, it's a sort of, it's thousands of years old. Origins is India. it looks a little bit like a diamond, I think. So there is either or, both, and neither, and also a potential for something else. And I wondered whether, Daniel, you think, is there a use for tetralemma as a tool in sense making? If you don't think so, could you say why not? Thanks.
Sure.
That's me.
I don't think I know what video you watched. Alex, can you say what one was shared?
It's a composite of a bunch of different ones. So yeah,
It's
it's
all
just
right.
different interviews on the
So-
channel. That's all right.
The first question, I was saying that when you're trying to make sense of what other people are saying, one of the questions should be an inquiry into their motive to say it, to see if they have a motivated reasoning that might be affecting the nature of what they're saying. And is that what I was talking about? Okay, so you're wondering what is my motive in being here right now, or in talking about sense making in general?
Sense making in general, and some of the specific things you talk about as well. So you have very strong views on a number of things. So I'd like to hear a little bit more as to, yeah, what's your motive overall, I guess.
So one of the things in inquiring into people's motive is people almost never have one motivation to do something, right? Typically, people have quite a few different motivations, and I would say the degree to which their motivations are known to them as opposed to not known to them, and the degree to which their motivations pull in the same direction rather than pull in opposite directions, is one way of thinking about the psychological health of that person, right? The first one has to do with how much is the shadow and the awareness. The second one has to do with parts reconciliation. Is there a harmony between the parts of themselves, or is there a internal conflict between the parts of themselves? So I can say there are multiple different reasons that I talk about the things that I do. I will say the primary ones that come to mind for me first. When I was 9, I came across factory farms, just kind of on accident. That got me to start studying factory farms. That's when I became a vegetarian, and since I was homeschooled, I got to just pretty much put 100% of my attention into the area of inquiry. So I dove in with PETA and those types of groups and animal rights issues at the time. And that was the beginning of existential devastation for me. Everybody has their own different story, but it's just so fucking horrific that I didn't feel like I could be complicit with my species. I didn't want to, be part of a world where that happened at all, and especially at that scale. And so it was the first time I had a suicidal impulse of like, fuck, this place is fucked up, I want out. And then I'm like, all right, well, if I'm out, all those animals are still in that condition. And it's not just animals, it's kids who are getting beaten, and it's all kinds of fucked up stuff. And so that's a totally selfish move. I can't do that. But then I was like, okay, what life feels like a success for me while that's still happening? And there's none of them. Like, I couldn't think of a life that felt like success for me while those things were still happening. And I felt like I would have to be some kind of sociopath to be able to separate my well-being from theirs enough that I could just be totally stoked while that was happening. And I realized that I didn't feel like I could take any credit for the fact that I wasn't born into poverty in Liberia where I'd become a child soldier, or that I wasn't born as one of the animals in the factory farm. Like, I was lucky to not be there. And I don't feel that they made that they're being punished for bad things they did in a past life, being born into that situation, or that their spirit chose it for some reason. It's just, those are the ways that we try to rationalize things that seem unfair in a totally individualistic way that's just gibberish to me. So I'm like, all right, well, associated with this luck or fortune of being in a position not like that and a position to understand it is also an obligation to do something meaningful for those that are there. And then when it went from factory farms to looking at overfishing of the oceans and whaling and plastics and pollution to then looking at poverty, and it just kept being like, fuck, what of those things are okay to keep happening? And none of them were. And it's like, all right, well, there's a lot of people that are, you know, every bit as smart and caring and competent as me that have devoted their whole life to one part of it and not solved it. So what the fuck am I going to try and do across the whole scope? Because whatever I focus on, the other things aren't being focused on. And I started to realize that it was actually the orientation to focus on the individual parts of it that was one of the problems, because they were actually all not just interconnected, but expressions of deeper issues that were then being not focused on. And that actually focusing on the deeper underlying causes of all of it had more potential than at the symptom level of any of it. So then I'm like, how do I fucking figure out how to do that? So I'm still there, right? Like that's still deep in my motivational landscape. And so I feel more existential hope when more other people start thinking about things that way and start to apply their lives in that way. I feel less existential hope when that's not happening, right? And so I'm motivated to try to get more people to think more deeply and care more, where then they start having to change their life in a way where the energy of their life is more useful to the bigger picture. And I would also say, I mean, if you want to talk about the selfish side, like I said, I don't see a model that feels like success for me without that, for me as a person. The other thing is I don't know how to solve some of the problems. And I actually trust collective intelligence, meaning that someone who has a better technology background and someone that has a better history background and someone that has been an educator and had insights in working with kids, that will all have insights into it that I will never have. So the more people that are thinking and communicating well and working on it, the better I think it is. So I'm very much oriented to not trying to have some kind of central, it all figured out master plan, but to have a collective intelligence that is converging towards competence. And so me educating people on some of the things that I think are important is one of the best things I know how to do towards that, towards getting more people to be thinking on and hopefully working on and contributing to those things. That's the main reason. There are other reasons, but that's the main one.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Now your question about what did you call it? Not
a tetralemma.
Tetralemma. I haven't used that exact.
Because you were talking about Hegel's dialectic, which is the thesis and antithesis, synthesis, and the tetralemma offers it can be this or that. It could be neither this nor that. It could be both, or it could be none of those things and completely something else. And I wondered whether that offers also a tool for sense making, and what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, of course it is. Each of those are a question. And rather than say on the either this or that, the version where someone has to try to make the case for each, which is kind of classical rhetoric in the trivium. Man, that's just such fucking basic education, and we've lost it almost completely. Trying to make the case for each is both a practice in empathy, because I have to actually try to get why people would believe that, why they would feel it, why they'd be motivated by it. And it's a lesson in perspective taking, right? And in validity of thought. Is this argument I'm making valid? Meaning, do the propositions follow from the premises? And so, and if I can argue one side and then I can argue the other side and then I can step back, then I can start to have a better higher order perspective, I also start to decouple my own identity with a particular perspective. So what is it that can take multiple perspectives is not my perspective. It's something higher than my perspective. It's the perspective seeking capacity that is something more like a higher dimension of self. So I think, like, just as a very first starting point, whatever your belief on the thing is, do I actually know how to argue this well? Not even argue the other point. Do I even know how to argue my own point? I can't tell you how many people don't know how to prove that the earth is round, yet who use flat earther as a slur. And yet, like, they didn't fucking read Copernicus. Like, they're just taking it as an article of faith. And they didn't read the Greeks who got it before that or any of the others. And so it's like, can I even construct my own thought process well? Can I construct how I came to it? Then actively go seek ones that disagree with it. And then can I construct those well? And then only after I've done all that can I actually start to think, which means seeking novel insights. That's just like fucking blocking and tackling, right? But then the thinking is not just, can I repeat and double down someone else's meme? It's, can I have a thought that isn't just a meme? So that kind of training is actually so fucking simple, but it takes training. So, like, no matter what topic that I would be helping teach people on, there are things like, can you find the various narratives or beliefs on this, right? That's the perspective seeking part. Can you even go find them? And then can you take them? Can you argue them well, right? This is the logical validity and perspective taking part. Then can you start to apply analytic methods? Can you seek to falsify and verify specific propositions and identify specific propositions that, if falsified or verified, would cleave the space into more or less likely things, whatever. Then can you step back and synthesize the high confidence things across those into a higher order complexity perspective? That, like, those types of questions are just across all fields. And obviously they apply to mechanical engineering much less than to social sciences because of the nature of complicated versus complex systems. But in the social domains in particular, these are critical. So I haven't used the specific tool you're talking about, but it sounds like a good tool. And, like, a saw is a very good tool for cutting, and it kind of sucks for banging things in or screwing things. So you want lots of tools, and you want to, like, a master craftsman is not someone who has a favorite tool and is kind of married to trying to use it all the time. It's someone who knows how to use all the tools and can innovate new tools. So I want people to be good with tools, but also not a practitioner of a tool, right? Same with psychological methods. As long as you're a practitioner of a specific psychological method, AI could replace you. Right? A narrow AI could just do that thing as well as you are doing it. The difference between what tool to apply and how to modify it and where to simply do something that's outside of any of the tools, that kind of true general intelligence and presence is the thing I'm really looking for in educators and therapists.
Awesome, thank you. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Lorna. And we have a question from Uwe that was heavily upvoted, so it feels only natural that we go to that next.
Okay. Hello, Daniel. So I was wondering, hearing your story there about the factory farm and then the, all the motivation. What do you think is the role or priority that you would assign to fostering more broader, what's called like spiritual awakening, basically to deal with the underlying cause of selfishness and short-sightedness, etc., that at least to me it looks like that's when that's transcended and falls away, then naturally there's that kind of caring arises that was there in you, that you described. And when I imagine that when that's more broad, then that should hopefully lead to kind of like a snowballing effect of that kind of orientation naturally. Somebody said here in the chat that, sorry if I'm misquoting, that the kind of processes described a little bit like heavy left brain leading, etc. So maybe that's related.
Someone had asked a question earlier, Alex, you showed me about what is intuition. We can come to that one later if you want, because it's still in the domain of sense making more than in the domain of ethics or values, but of a different type. So I want to maybe separate and try to get a sense of what we mean by spiritual and what we mean by ethical, and where those can overlap and where they cannot overlap. Because you framed it in terms of spiritual, but then the net result of the spiritual was that people had more care and compassion and less greed and selfishness that basically predisposed behaviors that were more oriented to the good of others and less harmful. And so I have seen plenty of people do what they call spiritual developments that does not make them more compassionate and that doesn't make them better ethical actors. And so that's why I want to make this distinction. There's a great poem by Hafez, the Sufi poet, called How Many Goats? You should all look it up if you haven't seen it. But basically, the man is doing all these advanced Sufi practices and having these amazing mystical experiences and seeing the various layers of the etheric body in heaven and whatever it is. And he finally goes to the Sufi master to kind of get validation about his experiences. And as he's talking about his experiences, the Sufi master is just asking him about how his kids are doing in school and how his goats are doing and stuff like that. And the guy has been paying very little attention. He's been pretty absorbed in his own experiences. And so then the Sufi master says, any experience that doesn't translate to the depth of presence and kindness that you bring to everyone doesn't really matter at all. I say that because I see a highly self-absorbed spiritual process quite common. I mean, I live in California, so I see it here intensively and other places. So there's you have a Buddhist line of thought that is the vow of the Bodhisattva that is oriented to the suffering of all beings in the universe, and I will enter heaven last. But there's another line of thought where there's this Buddhist saying, if you're dreaming and you see 10,000 people starving in the dream, what should you do? Run around in the dream trying to feed them all, or just wake up? And the implication, right, that's being made is this is a dream. This is Maya, or it's samsara. It's not really real. And the beings aren't real. The suffering isn't real. And as soon as you wake up out of buying into it, it's all gone. Coming from the kind of Vedantic idea of this being Maya and there only being one self, right? Ayam Atma Brahm, only the self is real, and all of this is Leela and whatever. I just have no interest at all in that kind of spirituality. I don't like the direction it takes people. And I see, so for instance, also the Abraham Hicks, every being is choosing their experience completely. And the animal in the factory farm and the kid who was born into being a child soldier. And what business is it of ours to do that? If we choose to focus on it, that's just us choosing to be low vibration. I just want to fucking smack the shit out of people that say that. And they would call that spiritual, and I call it sociopathic. So any spirituality that involves spiritual bypasses that make the that make our overwhelm at the pain of others something we don't have to deal with is net bad. It's like, it's not just neutral, it's net bad. I would remove that from the world if I could. So the types of spiritual experiences that increase our sense of interconnectivity with everyone and increase our sense of the beauty and sacredness of life and our desire to be in service to it, and that increase our sense of wholeness, where I stop being a hungry ghost that needs to get shit from the world. Yes, to those experiences as totally critical. Now, someone doesn't have to have any ontological model of spirituality to be there, right? I know atheists who are highly ethical people who have a sense of consciousness is an emergent property of brains. When we're dead, it's gone. But as a result, how fucking sacred is life while we're here? Because that's where experience gets to live. And so I want to protect and be in service to all consciousness of all forms. I'm fine with that. I'm totally fine with that. So, but the experience side, which is I can hold ethics just rationally, right? This is the good, right thing to do, so I'm going to do that thing. But if I'm battling against an inner experience that also feels like I need more stuff and more recognition and to be seen as better than others and whatever, and I'm having to try to battle those inside myself, I have a parts conflict. So I want to say, where do those fucking impulses come from, and how do I actually heal those impulses? And it's not just those impulses come from evolutionary biology. They come from evolutionary biology plus trauma and bad conditioning and a lack of development. So how do we heal that trauma and do the development to where the hungry ghost realm part chills out? Yeah, that's critical. And okay, here's the way I would say I think of it. So we know the model where desire is the cause of all suffering, right? And we also know the model more in the Western canon, where desire is the source of all creativity, growth, evolution, and goodness. And that made in the image and likeness of the creator, we're here to be creators and to be creative, and the desire is a divine spark inside of us. Those are very, very different takes. They're associated with things like a different model of time, where the Kalpa or the Yuga system and the Eastern system is a cyclic model, isn't ultimately going anywhere, right? So there is nowhere to go. So progress is ultimately an illusion of not understanding the cyclic nature of time, the belief in progress or the belief in evolution. And so instead, I just want to get off the wheel. I don't want to make the wheel better, because the belief in making the wheel better is ultimately an illusion. Whereas in the Western system, both the Jews and the Greeks, there's more of a linear model of time, in which case it's not just about being in the moment to transcend the wheel of time. It's about becoming and doing that actually make things better in time also, and that there is a net sense of progress. In which case, I'm oversimplifying so radically to say essential Eastern and Western, but I mean the essential coming from Vedanta through some types of Buddhism idea of cyclic time and desire as the cause of suffering and an orientation to being, and the essential kind of Western idea of a linear time, a model that has becoming and doing as essential, and desire as being fundamentally sacred, eros, right? These are, of course, I'm framing them up in a particular way. I'm framing them to both be partial truths that are missing something. So the happiness that is described in that version of the Eastern model that's associated with being is more like contentment, serenity. The happiness that is described, so unperturbableness. And the desire perturbs it by orienting you to a moment in the future more than the fullness of now, or something like that, right? And then you get you're not as present to the beauty of now. You get all fucked up wanting to make that thing happen. If it doesn't happen, you're all fucked up over it. If it does happen, you're only happy for like 10 seconds, and now you're anxious and afraid of losing it, and then you want something else. And that would be that kind of argument of like, look, there's no real happiness in that thing. The Western take there would be, no, look, the purpose was not happiness of that kind. First, we're going to define happiness more as connected to things like passion and meaningfulness than contentment. Contentment being almost more like a kind of psychological comfort that is associated with weakness rather than overcoming things. And that in the process of working hard to create a thing or attain a thing, it wasn't about the happiness I get when I get it. It was about the becoming that is happening, where I'm bringing more capacity through, and I'm getting to know more of the infinite potential that I am through actually developing it. And so then, of course, I'm supposed to focus on something else after that. These are both partial. They're both important. So I would start to then say, well, I think there's different kinds of desire. Again, I'm going to oversimplify. Let's think of desire as a impetus for movement of some kind, right? There's a basis for activity or flow. So if we think of it from a flow direction, I can have something that is like an emptiness inside that is seeking to get filled by something from the world. I want to attain recognition, credit, attention, seeing, validation, money, whatever it is. And I think it's fair to say that that direction always does create some suffering, because it's arising from suffering, and it's creating in kind, right? It's arising from a certain kind of lack of self. And so then even if you're trying to fill it up, you're still affirming that lack of self. To those who don't have, the little they have will be taken away, it says in the Bible. To those who do have, more shall be given. And the have there is actually a state of consciousness. And so but it's not just that you get to a kind of neutral and then there's no desire. If I feel whole, there's no desire. There's another kind of desire that comes from a fullness inside that is seeking to flow into the world. That comes from an appreciation of the depth of the beauty of life and the desire to honor it and to protect it and to add to it. And it's actually coming from wholeness and a connection of wholeness, and then recognizing itself as a part of it, and that life is not just static being outside of time, it's also becoming and doing in time. And that a full wholeness of self, a full spirituality, is all three of those. So those types of spiritual experiences I'm very interested in. And I'm very interested in any work that can help bring those to more people. Did that address the question, some of it?
Yeah. So I agree. There's lots out there and lots of seeking and stuff like that. And I meant specifically that kind of true shift that would naturally lead to the kind of caring that you expressed earlier, right? And if we could somehow manufacture that on a large scale, that should make a big difference. So in my personally, because you asked about process, it seems to me the Byron Katie stuff, like that inquiry process.
Yes and no.
In my personal experience, it seemed to have like a almost like a mechanical effect of chipping away on that ego structure until like the whole thing itself collapsed, and then there was a breakthrough. So it seems, to me, it seemed a little bit reliable.
Can I give you my feedback on the usefulness and the limits of Byron Katie?
Yeah, sure.
This might actually be useful for everybody in here to take a minute on, because it's a very popular, simple, powerful technique, and it's obviously related to all kind of CBT type techniques, but different. So first, I think the work is one of the better tools that I recommend more often out there, psychological tools, because you don't need a practitioner to work with it. It's super fucking easy and it's super fucking effective for lots of things. And once you have went through the work, does everybody know what it is? Okay, so Byron Katie, thework.com, she didn't train any of the inquiry methods that were like this. Supposedly it just kind of came to her through her own process. But there's just a few simple questions. You're upset about something, you identify the thought that you're upset about. He doesn't respect me. And you ask these series of questions. Is that true? Is it true that that person doesn't respect me? And so you have to think about it. Yeah, I think it's true. Next question, are you totally sure that's true? Are you 100% sure it's true? Actually, I don't know what's inside that person's mind and heart totally. You know, I'm reading into shit, whatever, like, no, there's some chance it's not true. And I believed stuff in the past that I was pretty sure was true and found out it wasn't true, so I'm not sure. It's important to recognize now I'm upset about a belief that I'm not sure is totally true, but I'm pretending as if it's totally true and I'm upset. And then who would I be? Then what is the effect of believing that thought? When I think that thought, what happens? Well, I get pissed off and I start thinking about everything wrong that that person does, and I start defending myself, and I lose sensitivity to all the beautiful things happening around me. And you just start to notice the cause and effect of that thought, not that person, because that person can still be totally judging you or not, whatever the fuck they're doing, and you're not thinking about it, and all that's not there. You're like, oh, my emotions, my thought are the result of my own thought. So then who would I be if I removed this thought? Oh, well, I'd be peaceful again. I'd be happy. I'd actually be able to be more compassionate, more creative. So you're doing kind of cause and effect analysis of that thought as if it was like a piece of software code running in your mind. When it's running, what does it do? If you removed it, what would be different? Now, of course, I can change my thought more than I can change what that person's doing. So it's also giving me more power over my own state, my own behavior. And then the last part is the thing she called turnarounds, which is like alternate hypothesis testing, where you run different versions of that thought and look to see how they could be true, almost like a Hegelian dialectic. Okay, so he's not respecting me. He is respecting me. Try to find a few reasons that that might be true. Well, he did say this, and he did say this, and whatever. I'm not respecting him. Well, actually, that's totally true. Right now, I'm just judging the fuck out of him without even asking him about it and shit talking him to other people and whatever it is. I'm not respecting myself. Oh yeah, deep down, I actually think that I'm not enough, which is why I need everyone's approval, which is why I freak out when I think someone's not approving of me. And what I actually need is, right? So it's that kind of process. So this is awesome, right? It's super, super awesome. So I will just give unequivocal support to using it that way. Now I'll say what I think the limits of it are, and specifically how they relate to the stuff we just talked about. So the first thing is, when you run through that process enough times on beliefs about money and beliefs about sex and beliefs about God and beliefs about men and women and authorities and yourself and your parents and all the stuff, you run through it enough times, a holistic effect starts to occur that Uwe was talking about, which is beyond that belief shifting. You start to get, my mind is just full of shit. Like it's just running this generator function of shit all the time, and I believe it, and it's fucking never true. And I can find opposite beliefs that are more true and more empowering, and you just stop kind of default believing the whole thing. And Uwe, you said something like the ego pattern, because the ego pattern is almost the collection of those predisposed unconscious habitual beliefs, right? So yeah, that's awesome, and it takes doing it quite a bit for that to happen, and it's worth it. And if you haven't, I suggest she has these worksheets, and do them like for an hour a night for like 2 months. And that's kind of the minimum dose where you'll start having this like, oh, fuck, I've just been running gibberish as my sense making almost everywhere. So it's a deconstructive method, right? It's a deconstructive method. I'll tell you the places where it goes off the rails. So, and that doesn't mean you don't use it. It means you contextualize it and amend it. So sometimes, back in the day, I went to a number of her workshops, and sometimes she would do this, sometimes she'd do the other thing. So someone says a particular belief that's bothering them. And she would question, is that true? Are you sure it's true? But the belief is an objective thing rather than an evaluative or narrative thing. here's a refinement I would make on the process is make a distinction between, is this something a video camera could see, or is this a narrative that has to be overlaid? If it's something a video camera could see, asking are you sure this is true, usually takes you into gibberish land. So, and it doesn't mean that good still can't happen, but I don't like the direction it goes for a bunch of reasons. So someone will say, I'm really upset. Why? The belief is, my kid died. She'll say, are you sure your kid died? And it'll go in the direction of, but doesn't your kid still live in your heart? And do you know where your kid is right now? Could they maybe still be alive? Are you sure you aren't dreaming? If the person knows their fucking kid died, like you're having to take them into extreme epistemic skepticism and disconnect them from this reality, because the level at which they don't know that their kid died, they can't fucking make any choices or operate. They can't save anybody else's kid from a car. They can't. So are you sure your kid died? I don't care about that. It's my kid died. And so then you have to, and the video camera could see it. The car hit him, he's dead. Okay, so now the next part is to be able to identify that the person is suffering excessively because of a meaning they made up that is not objective, that the video camera can't see, right? And so my kid died, and that means, and then you fill in, and that means I can never be happy again. And that means it's my fault, whatever it is, right? That's the thing. And it means it was my wife's fault because she should have been watching him. And now I have to hate her, or whatever it is. Well, so now I want to ask the questions on that. Are you completely sure that it's true you can never be happy again? Are you completely sure that, it's your fault, or whatever it is? Now something good can happen, because the subjective layer, the evaluative layer, is where the excessive and unhealthy emotional responses come. But I don't have to ask people to question what the video camera saw. And so that's a key distinction, is apply it to not the objective, but the narratized. That's the first part. The second part is the deconstruction doesn't give me reconstruction. So it doesn't give me a basis for choice, which is why sometimes you'll hear Byron Katie saying, going into a place of, in the kind of, when pushed metaphysically, going into a metaphysics that is solipsistic. I actually don't know for sure that anything is ever happening, and so I have no basis for certainty of any kind of choice at all. I don't know that this all isn't just a dream. I don't know that I'm not a brain in a vat being stimulated by electrodes who can know. And it ends up undermining the reality of the basis of both epistemology and ethics, which is the fact that I can't specify for certain doesn't mean I don't have way higher epistemic confidence on some things and other things, and doesn't mean that there isn't enough basis to be able to make definitive actions. So, so you can have a model that allows you to construct a real world, not construct, right? That allows you to actually have a grounding in the reality of a world outside of yourself and outside of your experience. This is the key thing, why I say solipsistic. To empower the individual, most people are too focused on their happiness or unhappiness as the result of others and circumstance. So what she's doing is the antithesis. No, it's just the result of your thoughts. Well, that empowers me to change my thoughts, but it's not just, so this also leads to that Abraham Hicks kind of thing of that the cause of suffering is always just our thoughts. So the only thing we need to change is our thoughts. No, I actually want to take kids out of sex slavery. I actually want to take the animals out of the factory farm. I don't just want to teach them how to think differently about it. And no, I'm not going to victim blame a kid who's in sex slavery for feeling badly because they're thinking negative thoughts, and put that there. Now, do I want to increase the responsibility that they can take if that's the only fucking thing I can do? Sure, but I'd rather just get them out of that situation. So there's a denial of the real world and trying to get people to emphasize their thoughts more. So it is the antithesis to disempowered victim mentality and external focus. It is not yet the synthesis that is looking at that it's not just what's inside of me and it's not just what's outside of me. Reality is inside and outside together. They're related. It is environment and meaning. It's objective and subjective. And full empowerment requires embracing all of that. So I can notice a meaning I made up about someone else's actions. It made me suffer unnecessarily and shift it, and still not condone their actions and set a boundary and seek to protect other people from that type of behavior, right? I can own responsibility on both sides of that.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you, Daniel. That's yeah, really beautiful synthesis of the inside and the outside, which is the whole directionality of the course. So it feels like a really fitting place to end. And thanks again for being here and for a wonderful session.
I had no idea where it was going to go, but these questions were all fun. I hope there was some value in it, and I'm curious to hear what comes from this course and what the people who are in here do afterwards.
Yeah, likewise. And in the very immediate term, everyone here, I noticed there's a lot of energy in the chat of people wanting to have a chat afterwards or keep the energy going. If you do want to do that, again, it's up to you. If you go to Circle, and if anyone does want to have an after chat, I'll just put the link in there, you know, post a message in Circle, maybe you get a few people together. It's always a possibility, and definitely encourage you to do that. So we're back next week, and next week it's David, and we're going to be Sensemaking the media. So we're going to be keep the focus on the outside and get really practical with that. I hope you have a brilliant week, and in traditional format, invite everyone to unmute and say thank you and goodbye to Daniel.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.